Today I'd like to talk about some of the new features of Capture One Pro version 11. So we can see here this portrait of this young lady. Perhaps hypothetically we would like to change the color of this background. Previously I would take an image like this, process it out, take it into Photoshop, create a complex mask, and then change the background color. We can do some of that work now here in Capture One. First thing I want to do is create a new layer here in the Layers tool. This one I'll call Background Color. So we can name our layers just like we do in Photoshop. And I need to draw out a mask, so I'm going to get the brush tool here and get a brush going. Hit the M key so I can see my mask and basically draw out along the edge of her here and just kind of cruising pretty loosely here around her and try not to get into too many of the details here, just getting a good sort of base selection here around her with this mask brush. And coming around the edges here and back down to the end, like so. Looks pretty good. I can come up here to the tool itself and choose Fill Mask, which is nice. And in little bits here where I might want to, erase around if I had, brushed too far into her head here at the top, I can erase some of that. And I can toggle with the B key back to the brush and get some of that going. Now this is it's a fairly hard edge selection, so we're going to need to finesse it a bit, but right now I'm just kind of painting in the areas of importance along the edge here. Need to work with that. Great, looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and take a look at this mask. Under the brush icon here, I can choose Display Grayscale Mask. You can see it's kind of a hard edge selection, so we're going to need a little more transparency along the hair there. So back here on the Layers tool, I can choose Refine Mask, and you can see that automatically applies a certain amount of this refining, which puts some gray tones along the edge of her hair there. Looks fine. I'm going to choose that. I'm going to come back to see my image again. Now we can come down here to the color editor, choose in this advanced mode the eyedropper. I'm going to choose a color of this background. I'm going to go ahead and expand that range a bit of this background, and as I toggle the hue slider over, I can change that background, you can see now, to this more orange tone. Maybe I want to pump up the saturation a bit, that sort of look. I can see little bits where maybe my mask is not super tight. I can come back to my brush tool and I can paint in some of those areas like so to try to remove some of that red tone. Let some of the orange spill through, which would be, fairly natural look, like so. Another use of one of the other new features here in Capture One Pro is working with skin tone. You can see in this portrait we've got this couple and it was a pretty hot day, so they're kind of shiny. And so again, we can come back to our layers to sort of isolate this area. We'll call it Skin Tone. And that's the layer we'll be working with there. And I'm going to go ahead and get my brush tool again. I'll zoom in a bit and go ahead and begin to paint over the skin areas here. These are the areas that I'm looking to have this effect applied to. It's a little different than working with quick masking in Photoshop. In this case, I'm looking to kind of target. I'm going to avoid the eyes here. It looks like she could use a little bit as well. Go ahead and target these areas. It looks a little funny here in this view, but this is just so we can see the mask where we're painting it on. She needs a little less of it. She's looking less shiny than he. Good. I can hit the M key and just kind of take the visibility away of the mask. And I can come down here to the color editor again and choose Skin Tone and grab the eyedropper and choose a pleasing skin tone. And I can expand that information out a little ways, expand the range. And down here there's this uniformity slider, and as I toggle the lightness up, let me show you the before after I toggle it up a ways, before, after. You can see it starts to blend some of the splotchiness away to create a little more uniformity between the highlight and shadow areas. I can work with the hue and saturation sliders as well. It's really this lightness slider that's going to give me most of that smoothing effect before and after. Sort of doing some of what, I guess, frequency separation is trying to do in Photoshop, but getting at it here in Capture One. Another area where some of the new features of Capture One can be really helpful is if you're working on an image that needs a crop applied, that would maybe be used on the cover of a magazine, so we need to know where the type is going to land. And it's going to have some extensive retouching, and we need to communicate that information as the photographer over to a retoucher. So some of the new features that we can work with here, in the metadata, there's this annotations field, and I can grab this pencil tool, and you'll see here on this image that, maybe they could write right on it and put CL for clone. And maybe this information, we've got a second capture where we've got darker driftwood. Maybe we want to bring some of that information in, so I can write 155 for that capture number. And that way a retoucher later knows, okay, we're pulling from 155 to composite that in. We're going to clone, or dust and scratches some of this work. I might look at this area for some highlight information, maybe some work up here for some cloning, that sort of thing. And maybe look here for some blending, try to fix some of that. Maybe that would be an area where frequency separation would be helpful as well. So, and this information can be exported with a PSD, which is really nice, and we'll take a look at that. Some of the other things that we would do to a file like this is we would take a look at some kind of overlay. In this case, if this was being used for a magazine cover, this would be a helpful sort of thing to show the art director on set, where everything is landing. And we also might be looking for some sort of crop that fits that same shape. So we can take a crop of that as well. And you can see that at this point, we've cropped the file. When we go to export this, we'll have to be careful if we want this to remain uncropped to designate that here when we go to process the file. So over here in our process dialog, you can see here this Adobe 300 pixel PSD. And under the adjustments pane here in the process recipe, normally I have this set to ignore crop. But in this scenario, I would want to ignore the crop, but I'd also want to somehow save this crop to be seen by somebody down the line. So I can choose to crop to a path, which will take this crop and it'll save it as a pen path in the paths palette in Photoshop, which is nice. And then over here in metadata, I can choose annotations, which will save as a layer, and overlay, which will save as a layer as well, so that when I go and process this file out, it saves this information to our Photoshop file, which is extremely handy. We'll take a look at this once this process is out. And here's our image. We're going to open it up in Photoshop, and you can see that it saves all this information, but here are my retouching annotations on a layer, and here's the overlay crop, or just the overlay information, and then here's the crop itself saved to the Paths palette. So I can command-click that, and to see it a little bit easier, I can also just look at it here, and it would give me the ability then in post-production to crop it here. So those are some of the new features of Capture One Pro version 11.